On the day of her husband's funeral, Jasmine was dragged out of the church with her baby in her arms. Disowned, discredited, and erased by the very family that once promised to protect her. But when a mysterious millionaire pulls up beside her in the rain and opens his car door, he doesn't just offer her a ride. He offers her the first step toward reclaiming the truth, exposing a legacy built on lies, and rebuilding a life torn apart by silence. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The sky wept that morning. Soft rivulets of rain threaded down the stained glass windows of St. Clement's Chapel, casting fractured colors onto the polished marble floor inside. Outside, under the shadow of the old oak trees lining the courtyard, Jasmine stood at the foot of the church steps. Her coat clung to her body, soaked through, and in her arms was her infant son, bundled tightly in a pale blue blanket that had already grown damp at the edges. She clutched him closer, her trembling fingers brushing his tiny cheek, as if drawing strength from his warmth. Her eyes, red-rimmed, glassy with sleepless grief, lifted toward the heavy wooden doors of the church. They stood ajar, just enough to show a sliver of light from within, a faint glimpse of white lilies adorning the altar, and beyond them, a framed photograph of a man smiling. Michael, her husband, dead. She hadn't even seen the body. Everything had happened so fast, the crash, the call, the cold formalities. Now here she was, outside his funeral, unwelcome. Juliet descended the steps like a shadow given form. Dressed in black from her veil to her patent leather heels, Michael's mother carried herself like a queen in mourning. Her gloved hands were clasped tightly in front of her, but there was no tremor, no wetness on her cheeks, only steely control. "If you do not sign this waiver," she said, voice sharp as the wind, "you are not stepping foot in this church." Jasmine didn't move. She barely blinked. The baby stirred in her arms, making a soft coo, and she instinctively rocked him gently. "I have every right to be here," she said quietly, but with a strength beneath the softness. A scoff cut through the drizzle behind Juliet. A man stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, his suit crisp, his jaw clenched. "David, Michael's older brother. You were never his equal," he said, holding out a folded document, its edges damp. "You're just some girl from wherever. You don't belong to this family." Jasmine's gaze dropped briefly to the paper, then rose to meet his eyes. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice breaking ever so slightly. "I just want to say goodbye." Juliet stepped closer, towering over her. "Then sign the waiver. Deny any claim to his estate. That's all we ask." "You mean everything he left for our son?" Jasmine whispered, her fingers curling tighter around her baby. "You want me to act like we never existed?" "Exactly," David said, his impatience flaring. "Sign it or leave." The tension crackled like static. The few guests lingering near the entrance turned their heads. Some fidgeted, unsure whether to interfere. Most said nothing. The rain intensified, soaking the hem of Jasmine's dress, darkening the sidewalk around her boots. She looked down at her son, his cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes blinking slowly, and she kissed his forehead. Then she straightened, her back stiff with resolve. "No." The word fell into the silence like a stone dropped in still water. David didn't wait. He reached out, grabbed her arm, and shoved her backwards. She stumbled, one foot slipping on the slick stone, the other catching the edge of the bottom step. She grunted as she hit the railing, her body curling protectively around the child. The baby cried out, startled by the jolt. "You're making a scene," Juliet hissed, adjusting her veil with disdain. "This is a respectable family." Jasmine's breath came in hard, uneven gasps. Her knees ached. Her hands trembled. She stood slowly, her damp curls falling into her face. She turned once more to the church. The doors, once slightly open, were now closed. She was locked out. Shut out. Silenced. Behind those doors, her husband's memory was being honored. Inside were the pews where they should have sat side by side. The aisle where she once imagined walking with him during their wedding. The altar where his casket now stood. And she was on the outside. The baby sobbed against her chest, and her tears finally fell, indistinguishable from the rain. The chapel bell rang once, solemn and hollow, echoing into the gray morning. The doors stayed shut. Not a single hand reached for the brass handles to open them again. Not a single voice from inside rose in protest. The hush from the church was more deafening than any scream. It was the silence of chosen blindness, of convenient ignorance. Jasmine stood at the base of the stone steps, arms wrapped tight around her son. His cries softened to small whimpers, and his head nuzzled into her chest. Rain slid off her hair in dark, wet strands, dripped off her chin, and soaked the neckline of her coat. Her shoes squelched in the puddle forming at her feet. She didn't move. She couldn't. If she did, it would mean the end of something. A goodbye never spoken. A love never honored. A marriage that, in their eyes, never existed. A cold wind swept through the street, lifting the hem of her coat and swirling the wet leaves across the cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blared, muffled by the rain. But everything felt far away now, like she was sealed inside a glass bubble of heartbreak. "Why?" she whispered, not to anyone in particular. Maybe to God. Maybe to Michael. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself toward the nearest bench just beneath the chapel's stone arch. She sank down slowly, careful not to jostle her son. He had fallen asleep again, one tiny fist curled near his cheek. With her free hand, she brushed damp hair from her face. Her fingers found the thin silver chain around her neck, and she pulled out the small pendant hanging from it, a locket, worn and scratched. Inside was a picture of her and Michael, cheek to cheek, their foreheads pressed together, laughing. That was taken on the pier. The night he told her he loved her. The night he said he didn't care what his family thought. "They'll come around," he had said, arms around her, voice confident. "They'll see what I see." But they never had. And now he was gone. And they'd made sure she stayed invisible. She looked up again at the church, her teeth pressing hard into her lower lip. She could picture the service as it unfolded. Juliet seated in the front pew, dabbing the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. David likely sitting beside her, stone-faced and rigid. Someone would read the eulogy. The choir might sing something elegant. Someone might talk about Michael's business success, his bright future, his family name. But no one would say that he had a wife. No one would say he was a father. The injustice burned in her throat like bile. "Michael," she murmured, voice trembling. "They've erased us." The rain had darkened the stone around her, created patterns like bruises on the ground. A low rumble of thunder echoed faintly in the distance, followed by a flicker of gray lightning on the horizon. It wasn't a storm, at least not yet, but the sky threatened one. She gently adjusted the baby's blanket, tucking it tighter around his tiny body. Despite everything, he slept peacefully. Too young to know the world had turned cruel. A sharp gust sent a shiver down her spine. She pulled her coat tighter, but it was already drenched. Her back pressed against the cold stone wall behind the bench. Every breath felt like it carried 1,000 memories. How he'd held her hand the day they eloped. How his eyes softened when she told him she was pregnant. How he swore he'd fix things with his family. Just give him time, he'd said. And now time had betrayed them both. A sob rose in her chest, but she swallowed it. Not here. Not now. She had cried enough. There were no more tears left that would make anyone care. Then slowly the baby stirred again. His lips puckered, and he gave a soft grunt before settling. Jasmine smiled faintly through her exhaustion. "I promise, little one," she whispered, brushing a kiss on his forehead. "We'll be okay. I don't know how yet, but we'll be okay." She leaned back against the stone, the rain still falling, a slow curtain between her and the rest of the world. And then she heard it, an engine. Low. Expensive. A sleek black car approached from the far end of the road, its headlights piercing the mist like watchful eyes. It didn't rush. It didn't belong to anyone from the church. It moved like it knew where it was going. It slowed. And then it stopped. Right in front of her. The tinted window rolled down. And that's when her story took a turn she could never have imagined. The window slid down in a seamless hush, revealing a man behind the wheel. He sat straight-backed, his features composed, his presence somehow quiet yet commanding. He wore a tailored charcoal coat over a navy suit, and his shirt was crisp white, the collar open just slightly, just enough to suggest that he had dressed out of respect, not habit. His eyes were an arresting shade of steel, and they settled on Jasmine, not judging, not questioning, but watching. The rain tapered for a moment, as if the sky itself held its breath. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was low and smooth, not loud, but it cut through the fog like a warm knife. American accent, but softened by years elsewhere. Jasmine blinked, too stunned to answer at first. She instinctively pulled her baby closer, the sudden appearance of a stranger jolting her defenses. I'm fine," she managed, though her voice came out hoarse. A lie. She wasn't fine. She was cold, abandoned, and soaked to her skin, but pride stitched her words together. The man glanced briefly toward the church, then back at her. "I saw what happened." Her eyes dropped. Shame flared in her chest. So he had watched. All of it, the shouting, the shove, the baby's cry. "And you didn't do anything?" she asked, her tone edged with hurt, though it surprised her. She hadn't meant to accuse. His brows lifted slightly. "Would you have trusted me if I had?" She didn't answer. He leaned back slightly and opened the passenger door with a quiet mechanical click. "Get in. You shouldn't be sitting out in this rain. The child, he needs to be warm." Jasmine hesitated. The world had not been kind lately. Offers, especially sudden ones, came with strings. She'd learned that the hard way. Still, she looked down at her son. His cheeks had gone pale, his lips a little purple. A cough had started, faint but rhythmic. The man must have sensed her battle, because he added, "Just a ride. Somewhere warm. Nothing more unless you ask." Still, she didn't move. Then he said softly, "Michael wouldn't have wanted you left out here like this." Jasmine's breath caught. Her head snapped toward him. "What did you say?" He nodded toward the closed doors behind them. "Michael was a client. Years ago. We kept in touch occasionally. He mentioned you once or twice. I recognized you. That's why I was at the service, well, outside of it." He looked away for the first time, jaw tightening. Didn't expect it to turn into a public execution. Jasmine stared at him. She saw no gloating, no hunger for gossip. Just a strange weariness in his eyes. And something else, fury he hadn't shown. "Who are you?" she asked, quieter now. He turned back to her. "Adrian. Adrian Sinclair." The name clicked faintly in her memory. She'd heard it once. Michael had mentioned an investor who had helped him out when the banks turned their backs. Quiet money. Loyal. Trusted. She looked at the open door, then back at Adrian. Her legs ached, her arms were trembling, and the baby let out another soft, wheezing cough. She stood slowly, gently cradling her son. The door gave slightly under her weight as she climbed in, settling into the warm leather seat with a sharp inhale. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and something crisp, mint maybe. Clean. Adrian reached back and pulled a thick wool blanket from behind the seat, passing it to her. For him. She took it and wrapped her baby tightly. The warmth seeped into her fingers like a promise. Adrian closed the door gently behind her, then returned to the driver's seat. For a moment, he just sat there, both hands on the wheel, watching the road ahead. "Where to?" he asked. Jasmine opened her mouth, then stopped. She didn't know. She had nowhere to go. Her flat had been emptied when Michael's family contested the lease. She'd been living out of a friend's spare room. But even that arrangement was shaky now. She said nothing. Adrian didn't press her. Instead, he put the car into gear and pulled away from the church, the tires rolling silently over the wet stone road. The church fell behind them, its spire disappearing into the gray mist. The past, for now, left behind in the rear view. Inside the car, it was quiet. No radio. No phone buzzing. Just the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof and the soft breath of a child against his mother's chest. Then Adrian spoke again, softer this time. "You don't have to talk. But when you're ready, There's tea and a fire waiting." Jasmine turned toward him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't look at her. But his answer came without hesitation. "Because someone should have." The drive was long, winding, and quiet. Through rain-streaked windows, the city slipped away, gray buildings, empty bus stops, shuttered shops all giving way to open stretches of road flanked by trees, whose branches bowed beneath the wet weight of the storm. The world outside blurred in watercolor strokes, while inside the car, a fragile peace began to settle. Jasmine didn't speak. Neither did Adrian. Words felt intrusive, like walking into a still forest and shouting. Her baby stirred occasionally, letting out soft, snuffling breaths as he clung to the warmth of the blanket. Jasmine rubbed small circles on his back, her eyes fixed on nothing, drifting in and out of memory. After what felt like an hour, maybe more, they turned off the main road, passing two tall iron gates that opened automatically at their approach. Beyond them stretched a private driveway, canopied by ancient trees and lined with flickering lantern posts. A house loomed at the end, its silhouette framed by the fading light and curtain of rain. It wasn't a mansion, not the kind dripping with gold and screaming wealth. No, it was grand in a quieter way, stately, dignified. A modern glass and stone design nestled seamlessly into the land, warm amber lights glowing through the windows like welcome lanterns. Adrian parked under a covered stone arch, then stepped out and rounded the car to open Jasmine's door. She emerged slowly, still clutching her child. The rain had gentled to a mist, more felt than seen. "Come inside," he said simply. She followed him up the steps. The interior of the house was unexpectedly warm, literally and otherwise. A quiet hum of central heating whispered beneath the polished floors, and the air was laced with the scent of wood smoke, vanilla, and old books. The foyer opened into a high-ceilinged room with deep leather chairs, a stone fireplace crackling quietly, and shelves lined with framed photos and dusty novels. A golden retriever lifted its head from a rug, blinked at the newcomers, then lowered it again without interest. "You have a dog," Jasmine said softly. "I do," Adrian replied. "That's Elliot. He only moves for bacon or thieves." A small laugh escaped her, sharp, unexpected, and quickly smothered. It was the first sound of levity she had made in days. Adrian didn't react. He merely gestured toward the sitting room. "Please, sit." She hesitated, scanning the space. Nothing felt artificial. Nothing shouted, "Look how rich I am." The wealth here whispered instead, in the quality of the wood grain, the softness of the light, the quiet art on the walls. "I'll get the fire going stronger," he said, already crossing the room. Jasmine sat on the edge of a leather sofa, adjusting the baby on her lap. His breathing was steady now, his color returning. The heat was sinking into her bones, undoing the ache in her fingers. A few minutes later, Adrian returned with a steaming cup of tea, a plate of shortbread, and a thick towel. "Dry off. Drink. Don't say thank you yet. You don't know if I deserve it." She accepted it all in silence, wrapping the towel around her shoulders. The tea was strong, honeyed, and hot enough to sting her tongue. The first sip nearly broke her. "You mentioned you knew Michael," she said eventually, eyes locked on the flames dancing in the hearth. "I did," Adrian replied, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. "He came to me once, too, maybe 3 years ago. He needed funding for a project. Couldn't get bank approval. I liked his proposal. More importantly, I liked the way he talked about you." Her eyes flickered toward him. "He said you were the first person who didn't see him as a last name," Adrian continued. "Said you made him feel human." A sharp breath caught in her chest. She hadn't heard Michael described like that in a long time. Not by anyone who mattered. Adrian leaned back, watching her carefully. "I assume you married in secret." "We did," she whispered. "Just us, a friend to officiate, no witnesses." He said it was only temporary. That he'd tell them when the time was right. "And then he didn't?" She shook her head. "He tried. I think. But Juliet, his mother, she always found ways to delay it. Remind him what was at stake. The company. The inheritance. His legacy. Which now she's trying to erase you from, Adrian said flatly. Yes. The fire crackled louder. Rain tapped faintly against the wide windows. Adrian stood and walked to the bookshelf. He retrieved a folder, thick, with red markers on the tab, and handed it to her. I've kept tabs on the family. More than I care to admit. Business overlaps, mostly. But I started looking more closely after Michael died. Something didn't add up. Jasmine opened the folder slowly. Inside were clippings, screenshots, financial statements, even transcripts. It was overwhelming, names she half recognized, terms she barely understood. You think they did something, she said. I think they're hiding something, Adrian corrected. And I think they're doing everything they can to make sure you don't get close enough to uncover it. Jasmine closed the folder. I'm not strong enough for this, she said, her voice cracking. You are, he said immediately. You're still standing. That's strength enough for now. She looked down at her son. His eyes had opened dark and wide, staring at the fire. I just want him to have what his father wanted for him, she whispered. Adrian knelt beside her, gaze level, quiet but fierce. Then let me help you. She met his eyes, searching for the catch, the fine print, the thread of selfishness behind the offer. But there was nothing there except sincerity, and a strange, unspoken grief of his own. Outside, the storm began to pass. Inside, something fragile had begun to root. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The next morning, the storm was gone. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Adrian's guest room, casting delicate bars of gold across the duvet where Jasmine lay curled beside her son. The fire in the corner had gone cold hours ago, but the warmth of safety lingered. For the first time in days, maybe longer, she had slept without fear of being asked to leave, of someone pounding on a door with papers and threats. Her baby stirred in her arms. He was breathing peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling against hers like a quiet metronome of hope. She held him closer and closed her eyes again, just to stretch the stillness. Downstairs, faint sounds echoed, a kettle boiling, a dog's claws tapping on hardwood, a chair scraping back. There was life in this house, but no pressure. No demand. Adrian hadn't asked her for anything. He hadn't hovered. Hadn't invaded. He had simply made room. By mid-morning, she found him in the sunroom, though room was a misleading word. The space was half glass, half oak, framed by tall windows on three sides and skylights above, flooding the room with warm natural light. He sat in a leather armchair by a glass desk, his laptop open, reading. Good morning, he said, not looking up. Jasmine lingered in the doorway, dressed in borrowed clothes, her child balanced on one hip. How did you know I was there? Adrian gestured to the floor. Elliot, the dog, lay sprawled near the entrance, tail thumping lazily. He doesn't react to me anymore. Only to guests. She walked inside, easing onto a nearby settee. The baby settled back into sleep, cheek pressed to her collarbone. Adrian closed his laptop. I thought I'd give you time before we talk next steps. Jasmine looked at him, the lines under her eyes heavier now in the daylight. What steps? He opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a thin USB drive. I had someone look into the circumstances of Michael's death. It wasn't just the accident. It's what happened after. She swallowed hard. You think they covered something up? I think they're trying to erase you, he said. And more importantly, I think Michael left you something they don't want you to find. Jasmine sat up straighter, her heart suddenly pounding. He never had time to write a will. They said he didn't. They lied. Adrian slid a folded document across the desk. 2 years ago, Michael filed a preliminary will and trust agreement. It's not formal, but it's filed. And in it, you and your son are the sole beneficiaries. Not Juliet. Not David. You. She reached for it with trembling hands, eyes scanning the elegant, familiar handwriting. He never told me, she whispered. He might have been planning to wait until he secured everything, business, property, protections. But he filed it. That's enough to fight with. Jasmine blinked, her throat tightening. How did you get this? My people spoke to a clerk who owed me a favor. And you just did this? For me? Adrian shrugged. For Michael. And because I don't like bullies. Especially wealthy ones who hide behind legacy and lawyers. She bit the inside of her cheek. Her instinct screamed not to trust too easily, but her heart was crumbling under the weight of relief. Adrian stood and moved to a small bar cart, pouring a glass of water. He handed it to her. "There's more," he said. Juliet's company, Stellar Court Holdings. It quietly absorbed several of Michael's shares the week after he died. Shares that should have passed to his next of kin. "Me," Jasmine said, her voice a whisper. "Exactly. They're using corporate loopholes to bury your connection. If we don't act, they'll succeed." Jasmine sipped the water, staring at nothing. "I don't know if I have it in me to fight them," she murmured. "They've already taken everything. They humiliated me. Left me in the rain. I still wake up thinking Michael's about to walk through the door and say it's all been a mistake." Adrian sat beside her. Not too close, just near enough to feel present. Grounded. "I understand," he said. "But you don't have to fight alone. Let me handle the legal side. Let me bring in someone who knows how to hit back with paper and ink." Jasmine looked down at her son. His hand had curled around the fabric of her shirt. So small. So dependent. She nodded slowly. "I want him to grow up knowing his father didn't leave us to rot," she said. "I want him to know that we were real. That we mattered." Adrian's voice softened. "Then let's make sure the world remembers it." Outside, the rain had stopped for good, and the morning light burned brighter, spilling across the floors like promise. And for the first time since the funeral, Jasmine felt the sting of something she hadn't dared hope for. Rage. Righteous, beautiful rage. And beneath it, the first breath of courage. The courtroom was colder than Jasmine expected. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly, casting a pale, almost sterile light across the oak-paneled walls and worn carpet. At the front of the chamber sat the judge, her expression unreadable, hands folded, waiting for proceedings to begin. To Jasmine's right sat her counsel, a sharply intelligent woman named Mara Singh, handpicked by Adrian. To her left, Adrian himself. Calm, composed, dressed like he belonged here. And directly across the aisle sat Juliet. Resplendent in a tailored gray suit, widow's veil lifted now, her face pristine with years of privilege and confidence. She was flanked by two high-powered attorneys from a firm whose name Jasmine had only ever seen engraved in brass on city buildings. David sat behind her, arms folded, smirking faintly, as if he were attending an inconvenient charity dinner. They didn't look nervous. They looked entitled. Jasmine sat straighter. The clerk called the session to order. "This court recognizes the matter of estate of Michael Everett Tyrone versus Jasmine Adele Tyrone," the clerk began, "to determine rightful heirs, ownership of remaining shares in Stellar Court Holdings, and the validity of submitted testamentary documents." Mara stood immediately. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate not only the authenticity of the decedent's preliminary will, but also a concerted effort by the opposing party to conceal its existence and deny my client, his wife, her legal rights." Juliet's attorney rose next, a tall man with silver hair and a well-practiced frown. "Your Honor, we dispute the claim of lawful marriage and question the alleged document's legitimacy. We maintain that no formal will was executed. Furthermore, Mr. Tyrone's relationship with Ms. Adele was never acknowledged by the family, nor was it filed through proper channels." Jasmine clenched her fists beneath the table. Ms. Adele, as though she were some random woman and not Michael's wife. As though her marriage vows meant less because they were whispered in a quiet chapel instead of blasted across society pages. The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Tyrone, please rise." Jasmine stood, her knees steady but her breath shallow. "Do you have evidence of a legal marriage?" Mara nodded and submitted a copy of the marriage certificate, discreetly dated just over a year prior, signed and notarized. The judge examined it briefly, then looked up. "And was this document disclosed to the Tyrone family at the time?" "No, Your Honor," Jasmine said, voice firm. "Michael and I married privately. He was concerned that his family would react exactly as they are now. We were planning to make it public once our son was born." Murmurs stirred in the courtroom. Jasmine didn't flinch. The silver-haired lawyer stood again. May I ask the court to consider the lack of witnesses to this alleged union and the fact that no public acknowledgement was ever made? It is not uncommon for individuals to fabricate such claims in the wake of tragedy. Objection, Mara snapped. My client is not on trial for opportunism. She is the legal spouse of the deceased, with a filed certificate and a child to prove the nature of the relationship. The judge raised a hand. Let's stay on track. Present the will. Adrian leaned forward slightly, watching, unmoving. Mara passed forward the folded, notarized preliminary will Michael had filed 2 years before his death. The judge read it quietly for a full minute, lips pursed. Mr. Tyrone left all financial and personal assets, including company shares, to his wife, Jasmine Adele Tyrone, and any child or children born of their marriage, she read aloud. Another wave of whispers. Juliet's face tightened. David's jaw tensed. And this will was stored at the county clerk's office under a dormant designation? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, Mara said. And yet the Tyrone legal team made no mention of it when filing Michael Tyrone's probate request. We argue that this omission was not an oversight, but an intentional act of suppression. Juliet finally stood. Her voice was cold, brittle. My son was manipulated. She pulled him away from his legacy, whispered poison in his ear. We were protecting his name, his fortune. You were protecting your control, Jasmine said, rising suddenly. All heads turned. The judge raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. You never accepted me. Not when we dated. Not when I got pregnant. Not when we married. Michael wanted to leave the business, start something of his own. He didn't want to be part of Stellar Court anymore. You couldn't stand the idea of losing him. So now you're trying to erase the only part of him left. Juliet opened her mouth, but Jasmine cut her off. I don't care about your money. I don't care about the company. I care about the truth. I want my son to know his father didn't die a lie. Silence followed, the kind that feels like it shakes a room. Adrian's gaze never left Jasmine. The judge cleared her throat. After review of the submitted documentation and testimony, I am ruling in favor of the petitioner, Jasmine Adele Tyrone. The court recognizes her as the legal spouse and primary beneficiary of the late Michael Tyrone's estate. Additionally, I am instructing the immediate transfer of any improperly withheld shares to her custody. Any further obstruction will result in contempt proceedings. The gavel fell. It echoed like thunder. Juliet stood frozen. Her lips parted, but no sound came. David rose sharply behind her, knocking over a chair. Their lawyers began whispering frantically. But none of it touched Jasmine. She turned and walked out of the courtroom before anyone could stop her, her baby in her arms, her shoulders high. Adrian followed quietly behind. As they stepped into the sunlit corridor outside, Mara joined them, smiling slightly. Well, she said. That's how you rewrite a legacy. Jasmine didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was tight, her chest hollowed with shock, relief, grief. She had won. But it didn't bring Michael back. She stared down at her son, who looked up at her with wide, wondering eyes. And slowly, for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. The victory didn't come with fanfare. There were no confetti-covered headlines. No televised interviews. No champagne bottles popped in celebration. The courtroom doors had closed, and Jasmine walked out not as a woman made rich, but as one finally, undeniably seen. In the weeks that followed, the noise from the case dulled into silence. Juliet Tyrone retreated behind her estate gates, her PR team releasing a sanitized statement about complicated family disputes and respecting the privacy of all involved. David vanished from public view altogether. The Tyrone name, once untouchable, now carried a shadow, and for once that shadow did not fall on Jasmine. The estate was settled, the assets transferred, but that was never what she'd wanted. She sat now in the sunroom of Adrian's house, her child asleep in a bassinet near the window, a breeze fluttering the edges of a sheer curtain. Her tea had long gone cold in her hands. Across from her, Adrian read a book, One ankle casually crossed over his knee, his face softened in the late afternoon light. For the first time in months, Jasmine felt no need to brace herself. No part of her was preparing for someone to slam a door, revoke her place, question her presence. "Do you ever wonder if it's really over?" she asked suddenly. Adrian looked up, blinking once. "The fight?" She nodded, staring into the cooling tea. He closed his book slowly. "I think the legal part is. The emotional part," he tilted his head. "Grief doesn't obey verdicts." Jasmine set the cup down. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and have to start all over again. That I'll be back on those church steps." "You're not," he said firmly. Her eyes drifted to her child. "I was angry for so long, I didn't notice the sadness creeping in." Adrian stood and moved toward the window. The sun was beginning to set, washing the walls in gold and rose. "When Michael first came to me," he said after a moment, "he didn't talk like a man desperate for funding. He talked like a man finally believing in something." She looked at him. "You," Adrian said quietly. "It was always about you. And the life he hadn't had the courage to defend until he met you." Jasmine swallowed hard. Then why didn't he finish the will? Why didn't he tell them? Fight for us while he was alive. Adrian didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," he said, "the bravest things are also the most terrifying. Standing up to strangers is easy. Standing up to your family, that's another matter." She let the words settle. Outside, the wind shifted. Trees rustled like whispers of old ghosts being stirred. "I've been thinking," Jasmine said after a long silence, "about what I want to do with the settlement." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Not going to disappear to an island somewhere?" She smiled faintly. "Tempting. But no, I want to start something. A foundation. In Michael's name. For single mothers. For women who get dragged out of places they have every right to be in." He smiled. A small, proud curve of his lips. "I'd support that." She looked down, then back up at him. "Not just financially. I mean, would you help me build it? You know people. You know how to structure things." His expression didn't change, but his posture did. He leaned slightly closer, like a man drawn forward by gravity. "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." Their eyes met and held. For a moment, the air between them hummed. Not with romance, not quite. But something warmer, deeper. A tether of mutual respect, of shared wounds and mutual rescue. "I don't know how to start over," Jasmine said softly. "You already have," Adrian replied. A silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like soil waiting for seeds. Jasmine stood and walked to the bassinet, watching her child sleep. His small hand twitched in his dreams, fingers curling like he was reaching for something. She bent and kissed his forehead. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, not as a hope this time, but as a truth. Behind her, Adrian stood quietly. Not pushing, not rescuing, just standing there, ready. And for the first time since Michael's death, Jasmine did not feel like she was clinging to the edge of a cliff. She felt like she was standing on ground that could hold her. Spring arrived like a quiet miracle. The frost of memory had finally thawed. The trees outside the new community center bloomed with fresh green, and soft bursts of white blossoms danced in the breeze, falling like confetti from the branches. Jasmine stood on the steps of the building that now bore a brass plaque with Michael's name engraved in gold. The Tyrone Foundation for Women and Children. She traced her fingers over the lettering as guests trickled through the double doors behind her. Inside, a celebration was unfolding, not flashy but full of light. Laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses. Former single mothers, community leaders, local teachers, and survivors who had once stood where Jasmine had stood gathered in small groups, their eyes bright with possibility. Jasmine wore a pale blue dress today. Simple, soft, like hope made into fabric. Her son, now nearly 2 years old, stood beside her, one small hand clutching her finger, the other holding a cookie he had no intention of sharing. The boy had Michael's eyes. Every time she looked into them, she saw a past that had nearly been lost, but hadn't. She heard his voice in small echoes now. Not painful anymore. Just part of her, like breath, like memory folded gently into skin. From across the lawn, Adrian approached. He wore no suit today, just rolled sleeves and an open collar, sunglasses pushed up into his dark hair. His hands were tucked into his pockets, a subtle smile on his face as he watched Jasmine with a quiet fondness that had grown day by day, never rushed, never forced. She turned as he reached the bottom step. "You made it," she said. "I built half of it," he replied, nodding toward the building. "I'd be a poor business partner if I skipped the launch." She laughed. "You're more than a business partner, Adrian." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh!" She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked toward the center, where a mural was painted along the far wall. Women of different colors, shapes, and ages holding hands, lifting one another up. Her own silhouette had been included by the artist, standing slightly to the side, her arms outstretched in welcome. "It doesn't bring him back," she said softly, "but it gives meaning to what came after." Adrian followed her gaze. "Michael would be proud. Of this. Of you." She nodded. "I like to think he would have found his way to this place too, eventually." Adrian reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was unhurried, natural, like it had waited its turn and finally been allowed. "He did," he said. She looked at him. This time, she didn't look away. He didn't lean in. He didn't ask. He just stood close enough for her to choose. And when she reached for his hand, it wasn't trembling anymore. No fear. No shame. Just warmth and the weight of everything they'd carried, now light enough to lift. The boy tugged on Jasmine's skirt and pointed toward the fountain, babbling something about frogs. She bent, kissed his forehead, then looked back at Adrian. "Come with us?" He smiled. "Always." And so they walked, three shadows stretching together across the green lawn, sun filtering through the trees above, the air fragrant with new life and old dreams honored. There was no dramatic kiss, no swelling orchestra. Just love, reborn not in the fire of passion, but in the quiet choice to keep walking together. Not in place of what was lost, but because of what survived. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.